Guys, we need to talk about the next gen car. Because let's face it, it kind of sucks. Now, do I think it's the worst car that NASCAR's ever created? It's the worst generation of car in NASCAR history? And no, let's pump the brakes. There's still a very good argument that, at the very least, the Gen 6 car is a worse car overall than the next gen car is currently. But we're not going to talk about that. That might be a discussion for another video. What we need to talk about today is the next gen car, and really, what are the problems with the next gen car? Because you see, when the next gen car was created, it was kind of supposed to fix like 5 problems in one. It was supposed to fix dirty air. It was supposed to fix parity. It was supposed to fix safety. It was supposed to fix cost cutting. There were so many things that the next gen car was supposed to do, on top of making it a more modern stock car, though stock cars aren't really supposed to be modern, but we'll get to that later on. It was trying to fix 5 things in one, and frankly, I think it did really nothing at anything. Because you see, what is the common phrase that we hear from people? Be great at one thing and not good at a lot of things. It felt like NASCAR was trying to turn the next gen car into being something good at everything instead of being great at something. Because everything that I just mentioned before as to what the next gen purposes were, I mean, let's be honest, besides mile and a halves and besides now Martinsville, and that's really just due to a new tire, what does the next gen do that's particularly well? Cost cutting? Teams are spending more money than ever. Modern? I don't know how modern you could call a stock car. The more modern you get with a stock car, you go into sports car territory. Parity? I mean, yeah, but you still got guys winning, what, 5, 6 races a year? I mean, SVG is waxing everyone's ass at the road courses every time. Parity? Yes. A lot of other stuff? Not exactly. But why does the next gen car suck? What are the fundamental issues with the next gen car? Or really, what are the issues that everyone talks about? Because everyone likes to pinpoint at one thing here and one thing there and say that that is why the car sucks, and if we fix that thing, then the whole thing will be okay. When in reality, that's not the case. And that's really not the case with anything. You know, it's ever one problem. It's a multitude of problems that gets us to where we are now. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to go through a few things that cause the next gen car to pretty much suck, and what can be done to fix it, if anything can be done to fix it. So without any further ado, let's begin. Okay, before we talk about the diffuser and what are the problems with it, we first need to discuss why we have the diffuser in the first place. Because let's be honest, guys, NASCAR didn't just wake up one day in R&D for the next gen car and told themselves, you know what would be really cool, guys? Let's put a diffuser on the next gen car. I think that would make it awesome. There's a purpose for the diffuser, and we need to figure out what that is. And the purpose for, at least at the beginning when it was being created, was actually to clean up dirty air. You see, guys, during the Gen 6 era, especially with the 550 and to a lesser extent, you know, the 750 days, really after 2014, the Gen 6 car was a dirty air machine, especially in mile and a halves. And remember, during that period of NASCAR, the majority of races were at mile and a halves, unlike what we have today. So NASCAR needed to find a way to fix the dirty air issue at mile and a halves when that's what makes up the vast majority of the schedule. In comes the diffuser. Now, admittedly, I'm not an engineer. I don't know exactly what goes into the ins and outs of these cars, you know, why they do certain things, all that stuff. If I was, I'd probably be working on them. So I actually have a story pulled up here by Dr. Deandra. She is a writer. She kind of bridges that gap between, you know, like the science and, you know, like the reality to help readers understand. But she's also very knowledgeable in NASCAR, especially when it comes to NASCAR aerodynamics. And that is why, thankfully, we have this article written by her where she actually talks about the diffuser. So this was written on June 2nd, 2022, around halfway point through the 2022 season. And she really dives deep into not just the diffuser, but the next gen splitter, all the ins and outs of the car and how they're all connected. But for the purposes of this segment, I want to focus on the diffuser. So if we scroll all the way down here and we go to the diffuser segment, there's one paragraph that I want to show you guys here that really amplifies what the diffuser's purpose is, at least with this car. So here's the paragraph right here, and I'll just read it to you guys. The strakes create a swirling motion that not only hurl out air already entrained in the flow, but also draws in additional air. The outer tunnel pulls in the wake from the front tires. The way the air exits from underneath the car and rejoins with the air from above and on the sides of the car forms a smaller, more well-behaved wake. Basically, that means, she even says at the end here, less dirty air and easier passing. Guys, remember, what did I say before? Back with the Gen 6 car, the dirty air was a huge problem. And one of the reasons for that, she actually says it in this article just a little bit earlier, is she talks about how with the bottom of these cars, again, I'll use this car as an example, you see all these little crevices and ins and outs. That's all aerodynamics for the race car. I mean, if you guys have seen the bottom of the Formula 1 car, I'll put one on the top of the screen here, you'll see that the floor is very intricate. There's so many, jagged lines and things like that. That is all aerodynamics to help the car go faster, going through the corners, etc., etc. But that also creates a lot of dirty air. And not to the extent of those cars, but still to an extent, that's what this is. This is all aerodynamics right here. This all affects the air on the car. So what NASCAR tried to do, really more with the underbody and as well as the diffuser, is they tried to cut that off. They tried to say, all right, we need to get rid of those aerodynamic problems underneath the car, so we're going to make the car flat on the bottom and then add a diffuser to help clean it up in the back. That is why we have this right here. That is why we have a flat underbody and then we have the brakes right here. So yes, the next gen car with the diffuser is meant to clean up dirty air. But again, we have to keep in mind what the next gen car's purpose was at the time it was created, because that is a big important factor right now. I mean, let's be honest, guys, before the Gen 7 was introduced, we didn't even think about aerodynamics when it came to road courses or short tracks or things like that. That was saved for super speedways, mile and a halves, bigger tracks where they're faster speeds, not at a short track and not at a road course. So that is what NASCAR really had in mind when creating this next gen car, because again, that's what the majority of the schedule was. We had, I think, every mile and a half besides, I think, Chicagoland and Kentucky had 2 dates on the schedule. So because of that, NASCAR was making the next gen car, with mile and a halves in mind. We could talk about whether that was a good or bad thing. Obviously, hindsight 2020, it was a pretty bad idea considering that we got rid of so many mile and a half races and we brought in so many new short track and unique venues that maybe NASCAR should have took a little more attention at the super speedways, at the short tracks, at the road courses when creating this car. But remember, the diffuser was made to clean up the dirty air, specifically at mile and a halves. The problem is the diffuser creates such a problem when it comes to short tracks and road courses, because you can even see at Iowa this week that the dirty air is so bad that you really can't get that close to a guy and you can't really make a move, because whether you get tight or, etc., etc., the dirty air creates a bubble to where you can't really pass. And a lot of that has to do with the diffuser. I mean, that's why NASCAR got rid of so many of the rakes, trying to fix the aero on the short tracks, on the road courses, just to make some semblance of an improvement. And one of the places they started at was the diffuser, which tells us that the diffuser is part of the problem. Now, I'm going to give NASCAR a little bit of credit here. I'm not going to be one of those people who come out and say that, oh, why did they ever put on the diffuser? Why do they think that this was such a good idea? Of course it didn't work. Acting like they're aero engineers and they knew it was going to fail from the get-go, when they don't understand the concept of trial and error. I give NASCAR credit for trying something different. I'm always going to give them credit for trying something different. But clearly it didn't work, especially because we have more short tracks, more road courses, more super speedways, you name it. Well, thankfully Atlanta's pretty good, but you get my point. And of course, another problem is the fact that cars can go airborne because there really is no air getting underneath the car. So ask Ryan Preece, he's gone airborne more times than I could count in this car. So the diffuser is an issue. We can acknowledge that. But at least now we know the reason behind it. And at least for mile and a halves, it's working. Mile and a half racing is as good as it's been since the COT days. It's better than it was in the Gen 4, maybe besides 2014, but you get my point. But when we have less mile and a halves, more short tracks, more road courses, it's not a car designed for those things. It's a car designed for mile and a halves. And because of that, that is why this car is failing. And that is why the diffuser is failing, because it wasn't designed with short tracks, road courses, or super speedways in mind. Alright, let's move on to the tire, specifically the bigger tire that we have with this next gen car. If you guys don't know, much used to have the Xfinity tire, you know, smaller tire, 5 lug nuts, all that stuff, with previous generation of cars before we moved to the single lug nut, bigger tire. And admittedly, when it was first announced, I thought it was a good thing. I thought with more contact to the ground, I thought that with a bigger brakes, that the braking zone was going to be a lot closer to the corner, and therefore you're going to have guys making more dive bomb moves, making crazier action. I thought it was just going to produce better racing. And that's why I'm not an electrical engineer. But the big problem with the bigger tire is exactly that. There's too much contact with the ground. And what do I mean by that is more contact with the ground means more grip. You see, it's kind of funny how it feels like stock cars work. It's not like an Indy car or Formula One car, even a sports car, where aerodynamics are just as important as the engine. With NASCAR, it's kind of the opposite, because you want as little aerodynamics involved as possible. You want as little help from anything but the horsepower underneath you as much as possible in order to have good racing. I mean, that's why short tracks are such a great thing. That's why super speedways, mile and a halves with the Gen 4, and even to an extent the Gen 5, when we had the splitter and the spoiler all together. That's why it was so good. And that's why even in 2014, with the Gen 6 car, while I'm not a fan of that car, the high horsepower and kind of the lack of aero because the horsepower is so high, that's why the racing was so good. The problem is when you take down the horsepower like NASCAR has done for so long, and then you rely more on aero, because stock cars aren't very aero friendly, any little bit of aerodynamics is going to be detrimental. And kind of in a way, the tire is also responsible for that, because usually aero means downforce, and downforce is keeping the car as glued to the ground as possible. And the big tire helps that a lot. You see, when you have more tire, more rubber, you're going to have more grip, you're going to go faster, and you're going to be more glued to the surface. It's like you got a fresh set of tires on the racetrack, and you're going faster, you have more grip, you can do more what you want. A bigger tire is just adding fuel to the fire, or rather adding more rubber to the road, if you will. But the problem with stock cars is you want less rubber to the road. You want less aerodynamics, because that's what makes stock car racing work. It's drivers wheeling and dealing. It's heavy horsepower, little aerodynamics. That's what makes the racing good. That's what allows guys to go side by side. That's what allows guys to trail each other, because aerodynamics in motors, or at least in stock car racing, aren't really a great concept. But when you have a bigger tire with a bigger contact with the road, it creates more aerodynamics and more problems. That's why you see at Iowa or Richmond or Martinsville, where guys can't really get to each other. They can't knock each other out the way because they're just so glued to the track that the only way you can really move a guy is if you just straight up drive through them and then say sayonara. I mean, just ask Austin Dillon at Richmond last year. That's pretty much what he had to do. But that's why the bigger tire doesn't work for racing purposes. Because also part of the bigger tire issue is the single lug nut. Now, is it for aerodynamic purposes or things like that? Not really. There's other reasons for the single lug nut. One of the reasons is to make pit stop times faster, which kind of aligns more with other motorsports. You know, they take, like 10 seconds to make 4 tires, and fuel. NASCAR is now aligned with that as well. But another thing as well is that I have this article pulled up actually from John Probst. It's a NASCAR article when they announced that they're going to go from a 5 lug nuts to a single lug nut. And John Probst, NASCAR Senior Vice President of Innovation and Racing Development, he was mentioning or explaining why they were moving away from the former tire to the new tire. And there's a quote here that says, "Once you get an 18-inch aluminum wheel, the next step for us is to make sure that from a durability standpoint under racing conditions, that it will accept the durability that we need to finish races, and then also finish multiple races. To do that, the single lug nut was our only option." So basically, it's a safety reason. NASCAR said that we're going to a bigger tire, so we needed a single lug nut because it was the only thing that was going to be able to handle the load with a bigger tire. In theory, that makes sense, right? Have you guys seen how many single lug nut tires have coming off the cars ever since we got introduced to this? I mean, we had one, at Iowa, I believe, this week. I think we had one the previous weekend as well, at Dover. So let's just say we've had a lot of tire problems with this next gen car. I think we also had one in Indianapolis as well. So we've had so many problems with tires coming off these cars, that doesn't it kind of defeat the purpose of the whole safety argument for this bigger tire? The whole safety argument for this single lug nut? I mean, guys, you would think in theory, right? One lug nut would be easier to maintain, to take off and put back on. I know it's not really take off and take on, like the lug nut is attached to the wheel, but you get my point. Take off and take off. That would be easier and in theory safer than with 5 lug nuts, right? Apparently it's not, because we have tires coming off left and right like it's nothing. So we have a tire that gives more grip, which is what we don't want in stock car racing. We have a tire that's supposed to be safe, but tires are coming off left and right, so it's not safe. So again, it's not working, which is kind of the theme of this video. Feels like everything NASCAR has tried with this car, it's not working, besides the parity, but that's about it. And speaking of parity, we're going to move on to the final segment here, and I'm going to really dive deep into explaining why parity, at least with this next gen car, is why, the real reason why this car is failing. Alright, I apologize in advance if this is going to come off as a rant, because this is something that I believe fully with my fibrous being. And that is, Spec Racing is the worst thing that can happen in top level motorsports. What do I mean by that? When you think of Spec Racing, you probably think of IndyCar, you probably think of Junior Series, or even just local karting, where everyone's driving the same thing, and it's really just to help determine who is the better driver out there, because if everyone's driving the same thing, then the best are going to rise to the top and the worst are going to, crumble to the bottom. And that's what Spec Racing at top level motorsports is kind of supposed to do. Especially when you're NASCAR and you claim that you have the best drivers in the world, you want a way to show that. And one way to show that is, look, everyone's driving the same thing. So you got the Larsons up there, you got the Elliots up there, you got the Hamlins up there, even though they were up there already before we had Spec Racing. But we needed to further validify that they're just better than everyone else for some reason. But why do I say Spec Racing is the worst thing for top level motorsports? And the fact of the matter is, if everyone is driving the same thing, and if everyone is driving the same because of SMT data, so they can see how they're turning, when they're braking, when they're getting on the gas, so if everyone is driving the same way and driving the same thing, there's no variables. There's nothing to differentiate one driver from another, to differentiate one car from another. And what am I getting that? You just get kind of a traffic jam. Think about it. Imagine you're on I-95, for example, and you're going 65 miles an hour and someone else is going 65 miles an hour. You guys might be close, but you're not gaining on him. He's not gaining on you. And you guys are just separated by this for ever long until someone decides to change the variables. And the same thing applies with motorsports. If everyone is driving the same way, and if everybody is driving the same thing, of course they're going to be separated in total by maybe a second, maybe 2 seconds, because they're all doing the same thing. And in racing, this isn't just about stock car racing, but in racing period, when everyone's doing the same thing, nothing happens. You saw that at Iowa this week, where, yes, William Byron was trying to lap Noah Gragson, but he couldn't. But not just because of dirty air, but because William Byron's basically driving the same car Noah Gragson has. It's the same chassis, a lot of the same parts and pieces, just a little few differences here and there. But because Gragson is basically so close to Byron in terms of speed, and then on top of that it's dirty air, no wonder Byron couldn't really get by, or it took a lot longer for Byron to get by than it should have, because there's not enough variables in it. And a lot of people theorize that this is what NASCAR wants. They don't necessarily want passing, the whole point of racing. They want close. They want everything to be basically a super speedway like Daytona or Talladega. And frankly, I can't blame them. That's what gets the most viewers. That's what gets the most attendance. So I can't even necessarily blame them for that perspective. But when everyone is the same, there's not a lot of passing and there's not a lot of movements because there's not enough variables to take into account. If Brad Keselowski and William Byron have the same braking point, they have the same turning point, the same apex, and again, they're basically driving the same car, of course you're not going to see much passing. Of course it's going to take a long time for Brad Keselowski to get by William Byron because he has to find a different variable that Byron doesn't have in order to complete the pass. The problem with the next gen car and really just modern NASCAR with SMT data is that because everyone is doing the same thing, no one is doing something different. And until someone does something different, nothing is going to change. The passing isn't going to change. The car isn't going to change. It's just going to be a gridlock. That's why you see at Martinsville, at Iowa, at road courses, because everyone is doing the same thing. Well, besides SVGA road courses, but everyone's doing the same thing. No passing is happening. Yeah, they're separated by a second. But why does that really matter? If, again, they're all doing the same thing. No one can pass because they're doing the same thing. Why can cars pass each other? Because one is faster than the other. When the next gen is so spec to where you can't have that many variables with the car, the less variables you have, the less action you're going to have. And that's what kills me with spec racing. Because the more spec you are, the less variables you're going to have. Now, you can take away the SMT data and maybe it would be better, but that goes into my next point about spec racing, and that is racing is more than just the driver. If it was just the driver, why do we hire crew chiefs? Why do we hire engineers? Why don't the guys just go to your local go-kart track and then race there? At that point, that's spec racing. Just do that. That'd probably be, in theory, more entertaining than what we have now. But racing is more than that. The engineers play a factor. The manufacturers play a factor. This isn't stick and ball sport where it doesn't matter what baseball, it doesn't matter what basketball, it doesn't matter what football you have. They're all the same thing. A stock car is more equivalent to something like a baseball bat or a golf club, where they have to be different because they play that much of a factor. Obviously, a race car to a much bigger extent than a baseball bat or a golf club, but again, they play such a huge factor that you can't just eliminate that altogether. But again, spec racing is the biggest reason why this car is failing, because everyone's driving the same thing. And because everyone's driving the same thing, and on top of that, the SMT data, everyone is driving the same, there's no variables. There's not enough variables to make something happen. And when you don't have enough variables to make something happen, everyone is driving the same. No one can pass. They're just doing the same thing, lollygagging over and over and over again. And that's what causes spec racing to fail. I don't know why people in top level motorsports thinks it's a good idea, because in my opinion, it just shows a fundamental misunderstanding of racing. I mean, that's why Formula One is so successful, because yeah, the cars may look the same, but a Ferrari is completely different from an Aston Martin. A Mercedes is completely different from a Red Bull. And you can see that because there's a regulation, yes, but you're allowed to do what you want under those regulations. With NASCAR, the regulations are so small, you can't really do anything. And that's why you see the racing suffer. And in my opinion, that means more to why the next gen has failed so far, more so than the diffuser or the tires or anything like that. Elton Sawyer just came out saying that, well, there's a chance that they will increase horsepower in 2026. So it looks like they're already starting to head in that direction. So I figured I'd tackle things that aren't being mentioned, like the diffuser, like the tire, and like the spec car in general. But horsepower, of course, is a big thing. And I've mentioned it throughout this video where the horsepower means more for stock cars more than the aerodynamics, or at least it should. So at least it's good to see that they're heading in that direction. They're already talking about that to an extent. Unlike years past where they were like, no, we can't have more horsepower because, you know, fourth manufacturer that hasn't been here in like over 10 years. I'm happy that they've gone away from that to an extent. There's still problems with this car. Like I mentioned, diffuser. Not really doing what it's supposed to, at least at other tracks besides mile and a halves. Bigger tire. I thought it would do wonders. It's doing wonders in the opposite way. It's not doing really anything good at all for the reasons that I mentioned. But most importantly, a spec car is why this thing is failing. If the teams were allowed to do pretty much whatever they wanted with this car, I guarantee you the product would be much better than what it is now. Because while the Gen 6 failed in a lot of ways, it was still successful to an extent because it wasn't spec. Teams could do whatever they want with it, and you saw the variables that allowed for things like for races like Chicagoland, for races, even to a little bit of an extent the 550 package, like the 2019 Coke 600, for example. There was enough variables in play that allowed for things like this to happen. But when you take all those variables away and you make everyone run the same thing, this is what you get. You get boring racing, no one can pass, and everyone's angry. So those are the issues with the next gen car. And how do we fix it? Honestly, I don't know. I really feel like it's time for a different car, because you can fix a horsepower, you can fix a tire, you can fix a diffuser, but if everyone is still running the same thing, the same horsepower, the same parts, the same SMT data, it's not really going to make much of a difference, because it's just going to be the same thing, maybe with a little bit more slipping and sliding. So how do you fix a next gen car? I don't think you can. The only way I think you can is if you just allow teams to make whatever they want with the car. But I don't think NASCAR is doing that. So, honestly, in my opinion, I think the next gen is a failure. Because once you go into spec racing, this is what happens. You get exactly what's going on right now. But am I right? Am I wrong? Am I on the mark? Have I completely missed it? Let me know in the comment section below. And while you're at it, please like this video and subscribe to the Daily Downforce YouTube channel. That helps me out a ton. Check out dailydownforce.com for all sorts of great content over there. But that's going to do it for me, folks. I'm going to wave the checkered flag. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.